So we have three speakers in this next session. So Philip Tedeschi is a clinical professor at the Graduate School of Social Work and is the executive director for the Institute for Human-Animal Connection, an internationally recognized center for the study of the interrelationship and health of people, animals, and the environment through the lens of the social sciences. We are also honored to have with us Amanda Arrington. She's the senior director of the groundbreaking Pets for Life program at the Humane Society of the United States, and previously served as a lobbyist and North Carolina state director for the Humane Society. She is the founder and executive director of Beyond Fences, a nonprofit based in Durham, North Carolina, and is the vice chair of the Association for Animal Welfare Advancement's On Point Committee on Increasing Diversity and Animal Welfare. Amanda's work focuses on creating equity and access to knowledge and resources in underserved communities for pets and their human families. Also with Amanda from HSUS's Pet for Life program is Aleah Simpson. She is the Pets for Life Marketing and Communications Program Manager. She is an avid cheerleader, yay, for the human-animal bond, and her 15 years of experience in animal welfare give her an in-depth perspective of the systemic issues that can create challenges for both animals and humans alike. Throughout her career, she has worked with various animal welfare organizations to develop and advocate for programs that improve pet owners' access to care and promote DEI initiatives within animal welfare. Aleah was the founding manager of the intake and surrender prevention efforts for animal care centers of New York City, focusing on equitable support and targeting resource deserts for maximum impact. She created initiatives using a human-centered framework that encouraged employees and clients to maintain a sense of urgency while improving access to vet care, behavior training, supplies, and human-based services.
So as Carolyn said, I'm Amanda Arrington, Senior Director of the Pets for Life program at HSUS. I'm really happy to be with all of you at this conference, people who have a real investment and interest in ensuring equity and access to pet resources. And so it's great for us to get to talk a little bit about our Pets for Life work and to discuss the connection between animal welfare and social justice. The Pets for Life program was created for just that. I think we're having a little bit of issues with the sharing of the PowerPoint, Aleah. Okay, there we go. Great, thank you. So the program was created to increase equity and access to pet resources for people living in poverty and in underserved communities. And what we strive really hard to focus our work on and to contribute to is a philosophical shift in the animal welfare movement, to look at larger issues of racial and economic injustice and how animal welfare has been complicit in or even directly contributed to systems of oppression and discrimination. And then how do we begin to disrupt and dismantle those systems within animal welfare specifically and in society at large? We approach the work in three main areas, three areas that are individually important, but that also overlap to try and tackle access to care from both a micro and macro level. Our direct care programming is carried out in Los Angeles and Philadelphia. I saw some of those videos from East LA. That's the area of Los Angeles that we serve as well. In these two markets, our staff operate a community outreach model that builds trust and relationships and community partnerships through provision of pet services. We provide spay neuter, veterinary care, pet supplies like crates, litter boxes, leashes, collars, and other services like pet fees and behavior training, all at no cost to the pet owner. The largest footprint in our work is our mentorship and training, though. We want to make it possible for local organizations to incorporate community outreach and pet owner support into their core missions. So we provide financial support and extensive training to local groups around the country. To date, the program's been implemented in over 50 communities, and it's carried out by a variety of types of groups. And so I hope that whoever's joining us today, that no matter the size or the type of organization you work for, that these are tenets that can be incorporated into your organizations, because we have been successful in the program being implemented by open admission municipal shelters, limited admission or private humane societies, non-sheltering, animal welfare groups like spay, neuter, or community medicine clinics, and then even not traditional animal welfare, but native-led agencies. And then the third area of focus, which is some of what I'll talk about today, it might seem a bit more nebulous, but it's very necessary and an impactful area of our work, that through research partnerships like with IHAC and data collection and the creation of industry tools, we want to provide resources and guidance to animal welfare on how to make our movement more just and inclusive. And so what we've learned in our work is that it's extremely important to have context of the larger systems and structures that animal welfare is a part of, and how our work with companion animals necessitates the consideration of the human condition. And we've done so much good in animal welfare. We've done so many things well in our industry. Over the last few decades, we've made huge strides for animals. We've brought that animal into very sharp focus. That dog or cat or other types of companion animals we see very, very clearly. And what we now need to do, what we're proposing, is that we need to bring the entire picture into focus. That doesn't mean making the animal less seen or the animal being in the background. It means that we must grow awareness of the person that the animal is connected to, the environment in which that animal exists, and the community the animal is a part of. And when we have that greater clarity of the entire picture, we are then more effective and equitable in our work. And so there are layers upon layers of inequities and oppression that exist in every facet of society. And those inequities obviously impact people and therefore impact people's pets. And these are layers I'm sure all of you are familiar with in some form. But we believe it's important to call them out and to highlight the connection to animal welfare. So I'm going to quickly go through some of these layers that inform our program work and that we hope will more and more inform animal welfare overall. So poverty is pervasive in the US. Over 43% of the population is low income or working poor. It's around 140 million people. And this was, of course, before COVID forced millions of more people into poverty that we don't even really have a accurate and full count of yet. And while socioeconomics in and of itself is essential for us to understand in animal welfare, we can't talk about poverty without also talking about race and ethnicity. The two are inextricably linked in the US. And so as you can see here, a much higher rate of Latino, Black, and Native people live in poverty. There's also a significant racial wealth gap where the average white person has 10 times the wealth of Latino and Black Americans. Economists estimate that about 80% of lifetime wealth accumulation depends on where a person starts and intergenerational transfers of wealth. So advantage is literally passed down generation to generation. And so this current wealth gap that you see here, it's centuries in the making. So we can't ignore the foundation of wealth for white people that came from hundreds of years of human enslavement or from the massive wealth that white people gained when taking land from Native people. The wealth gap is unfortunately only getting more severe with growth. One more time, sorry, Leah. With growth in white wealth far outpacing that of Black and Latino people over the last 30 years. And so just a little bit about like what that means for wealth. It is more than just income. It's the full spectrum of someone's financial worth. And so in real terms, wealth impacts everything from sending your kids to college to the ability to care for aging parents, if you can buy a home, and so much more, including access to pet resources. And then another layer is the opportunity gap in education, where about 10% of white children go to high poverty schools, but over 40% of children of color do. And there's no one reason for or even solution to the disparities because our entire system is built on racial inequity. And just as one example, next slide, please. You can see here the difference in wealth that still exists when controlling for education. And so on the left is shown that white Americans with less than a high school education still have more wealth than do Black and brown Americans with a college degree. That's what's shown on the right. And there are many reasons for this racial wealth divide, and one of particular significance is home ownership. Here is where we can see a clear and direct correlation between policy making of the past and present day and pervasive outcomes. I'm sure that all of you have heard about, or you're familiar with the New Deal. To help the United States recover from the Great Depression, the government created the largest welfare program to date in our country's history. And a major piece of the New Deal was the creation of government-backed mortgages. Before the New Deal, home ownership was much more limited, as someone had to provide about 50% down on a home and then could only pay out the loan over 5 to 10 years. So the New Deal opened up home ownership to tens of millions of people by offering little to no down payment and then 30-year loans. In today's money, about $2 trillion was provided for home ownership support. Unfortunately, 98% of the recipients of that support were white. And the way that the mortgages were provided and approved and carried out was through a national appraisal system. It was set up in towns and cities around the country that guided where government-backed funds would be given. The areas that were deemed hazardous, where mortgage support would not be provided, they were marked in red. This became known as redlining. And those areas were Black and brown communities. So white people were given an advantage while people of color were kept from the opportunity of building generational wealth. And so this government sanctioned policy that happened in the 1930s, most redlining maps were created in 1938, 1939. It's not just something of the past. It really set up the racial and economic segregation that we still see today. And it determines so many outcomes, including the availability and accessibility of pet services. And there was a study that was conducted in 2018 that showed, next slide please, that showed about 3/4 of the neighborhoods that were redlined in the 1930s are still the low-income communities today and are still predominantly inhabited by people of color. And then conversely, the vast majority of areas, I don't know if you can go forward, Aleah, but conversely, the vast majority of areas that received government support are still the middle to upper class communities today and still mostly white. And so this is why we see in just about every single community in the country that there are areas of concentrated poverty and resource deserts, again, including pet resources. So again, just connecting those government sanctioned policies of the past with what we see in so many communities across the country today. Next slide. And so when home ownership is made difficult or impossible, renting is of course the option for people. And the challenges for low-income renters are extreme. This map here, it's a little bit hard to see, but it shows how there's not a single state in the country that has a sufficient supply of affordable and available housing for low-income renters. The numbers that are on each of the states, or the categories of the colors, they represent how many rental homes there are for every 100 low-income families. And in the red states, there's fewer. The lighter states, there's more, but still there's not a sufficient supply in any state. And of course, this doesn't take into account the availability of pet-friendly housing. And again, we don't even know sort of the impact that's going to come from the economic devastation of COVID and the pending eviction crisis. Next slide. Oppression is also ever present in law enforcement, where in study after study, every task force, every investigation has shown that there are racial implications in every facet of the criminal legal system. And this is just one example of that here from the Department of Justice, that white and Black Americans use and sell drugs at almost exactly the same rates, but Black people are subjected to drug arrest at more than double the rate of white people. And because animal welfare has an enforcement component, and we're often in a position of authority, it's imperative for us in the field to recognize these differences and experience and engagement with law enforcement that communities of color have, and the implicit bias that can exist in animal policing. And so naturally, next slide, please. All of this discrimination, it leads to a very imbalanced rate of incarceration. And I apologize, the slides are not coming across very clear either. There's some technical difficulties, but hopefully all of the information is still coming through. But you can see here the percent of the US population by race and ethnicity compared to the percent of the prison population. And so this obviously has an extreme destabilizing effect on families and entire communities, and negative impact on people and their pets. And so one final set of data, the rate at which our government spends taxpayer dollars for educating children versus incarcerating people. Every state spends more on punishment, those are the blue dots that you see here, again, a little bit hard to see on the screen, than on education, which are the orange dots. So state by state, you can see the comparison and just how much more is spent on incarceration than on education. And so this is not only a question of what's valued in our society, but we see this as another direct parallel to animal welfare and how we invest in our work. Is this what it would look like if we were to sort of have industry-wide stats? You know, are we spending more money on reactive measures, on punitive measures, than we are on resource provision and providing support? And so we think we have to take a hard look at that. Of how do we transition to really focusing on increasing equity and access to pet resources. And so I think we would be naive to think that all of these issues shouldn't inform our work in animal welfare and impact our approach. We believe that we have an obligation, in fact, to increase our awareness and understanding, that we also must admit animal welfare is not exempt from the reality of bias and inequity in the work that we carry out, and that racial and economic injustice is present in our programming, in our policymaking, and in our messaging. And so now more than ever, there's a moral imperative in animal welfare to really create a paradigm shift in our movement, one that values and invests in support services and creating equity, one that extends our compassion beyond the animals to the people connected to the animals, and that we have to stop penalizing people in poverty and change the narrative to represent that the problems are systemic and institutional, not individual. And that animal welfare should become intersectional, really carrying out our work in a collaborative way and with partnerships. With the universal love of and connection to animals that those videos before just highlighted so well, we have a very special and unique opportunity in animal welfare. When we honor the love people have for their pets and ensure that people have access to what they want and need for their pets, we are truly of service, not only to the animals, but also to people in the community at large. And so Aleah is now going to share more on how all of this should inform our community interactions, our program operations, and our day-to-day work.
Aleah, we cannot hear you. You are unmuted, so it's a microphone issue. No, we cannot hear you. You are definitely unmuted. It's a microphone issue. You might want to click in the bottom left-hand corner where it says mute on your screen and see if you can select like computer speaker or one of those options that are available to you.
Leah, do you have any headphones connected, possibly like AirPods?
We can't hear you.
Shake your head, no or yes.
No, you don't. No, we cannot hear you. I'm finding I can read lips though. Okay, she's saying 1 moment, the international symbol for 1 moment.
You may want to stop share.
I hope everyone has sympathy for these issues, like even when you think you have it all figured out and it's going to work well. Apologies, everybody, for the delay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Okay. I do not know what happened. I'm so sorry. It was working 5 minutes ago and then it decided to not. I apologize.
No problem. Glad to hear you. And then turn your camera back on.
Yes, let me try to do that now. Okay. There we go. We are back. So sorry about that, everyone. And maybe that will solve whatever lagging issue I'm having. Zoom, you have to love technology. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Sorry for that. Again, my name is Aleah Simpson, and I'm going to talk to you guys today about, just going to talk about empathetic access to care. So before we begin discussing this, I want to make sure we touch base on 2 points before we get into this work of how. The first part being really understanding what is empathy and what we are discussing. We're talking about empathetic access to care. And the second part being really looking into, like before we begin that work, we have to recognize and understand of the racism that is actually still really prevalent in animal welfare. But first, let's start with empathy. Empathy, it's really important to understand when we talk about empathy that it really means connecting to someone on an emotional level and really understanding where they're coming from and starting to feel those emotions. That's very different than pity or sympathy. Sympathy is more where you feel sorry for that individual, but you're still not having that emotional vulnerability of connecting with that person. And while sympathy is a response sometimes when we see individuals in crisis, or when we are doing this work, it doesn't really provide that connection that we're looking for that's going to be able to help you to do this. This video by Dr. Brene Brown gives an example, and it illustrates it perfectly, and I would like to share this with you today. So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection.
Aleah,
Yep.
if we can't hear that, if you would like to reshare, just before you share in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a small little box to share audio as well. That should do the trick.
In the small little box?
Yeah, so if you stop sharing your screen and then reshare your screen, and just before you select the video, there's a box in the bottom left-hand corner, really small fine print, that if you click, it will allow you to share your audio as well.
Ah, there we go. Okay, let's try it again.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." And we do it all the time because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay. So, and I think, so before we're going into that, so as we saw there, really the idea of we want to try to make sure that we're being empathetic with individuals. Again, trying to connect to that level of where we are, that understanding of, I might not understand what you're going through, but that emotional connection there of, I've had a feeling like that's similar. And that truly empathetic connection is what leads to those lasting connections, which allows us to do this amazing work. The second part I want to talk about is just acknowledging racial and social injustice in animal welfare. As Amanda discussed earlier in this, race is, like injustice around race is not in a vacuum, and animal welfare is not immune to this. As we see, there has been systemic issues involving housing, economic access to care, resources, and all of those take place as well in our field. And we are responsible for recognizing that as well. This next chart kind of goes over some examples of that we can see in animal welfare. It's pervasive in both a macro and micro level. Micro levels are something can be like something that's internalized, like using coded language to describe communities that we serve, such as those bad neighborhoods, or I wouldn't want an animal there, or saying I would choose to live in my car before giving up my pet. That kind of perversive language is still rooted in this systemic injustice that we might see. Also interpersonal relationships as well. Another one that could be as similar as like when clients come to us and they might not show the behavior that we deem is worthy of care, and providing care that's different based off of that. Those issues as well can resolve and create that drift and that divide between us and the community, which allows us to come farther from helping and providing resources. And we also see this institutionally as well. So it's not just at an individual level. The way that we have laws around licensing, or spay-neuter laws, or microchipping, over policing those areas and to enforce who has licensing, and even as RTO fees. There's a wide variety of systemic issues that we have. And in order for us to move forward while doing this work, it's going to take courage, and we're going to have uncomfortable conversations, and also taking that time to build that trust in the community. We may not see that right away, but that should not stop us from continuing to move forward with this work and trying to build a more equitable field for animal welfare. The part we can start with that is by looking at cultural awareness. This is really important for not only just our line staff, but our entire organization as a whole. You want to make sure that anyone who's working with our members of the public do a community assessment. Look at the cultures that are pervasive through your community and learn more about them. It's important, especially when dealing with work that involves crisis, that culture is how we learn, and culture is also how we learn how to deal with grief and stress. So it's really important to, by understanding that information, we can help people navigate to the best of their ability. Also, this is an ongoing thing. It's not just a one-time thing. You can make sure that the staff offers training. You can also just go out and doing community engagement and talking with the community and learning more, and working and partnering with human-based organizations in your area. And like I said, this should be involved for everyone, not just line staff, but everybody that's in the organization, volunteers, board members, and leadership. So when getting into the work, we want to make sure that you're creating a safe space for clients. That could be something if you're a organization that has like that works at a brick and mortar, that can be making sure there's a designated area for people to talk about these that's not in the lobby where other people can hear their situations. It could be as making the space welcoming and inviting. So making sure that there's not bars or there's not plexiglass or, in non-COVID times, and making sure it's a warm and welcoming environment. That could be making sure there's information available in other languages as well that for individuals that are there. And if you're out in the community doing community work, that could just be physical spacing. I use an example of when I worked in New York, obviously space is a luxury in New York City. So in some of our locations, we were able to utilize rooms, and other locations we had to just move to the side of a corner in our lobby and just kind of create that space with our body and ask to have that conversation there. So it's really about trying to make that space for someone to be able to be open and vulnerable to us if they so choose so. And establishing connection. So it's really important when doing this that we are making sure that we're trying to build that trust and rapport. The way that you do this at first is you want to just first start and try to what we call like a door opener. So when you're going to meet someone for the first time, just ask them a question. How are you? How can I help you? Sometimes we are in animal welfare, we're so excited that we want to provide those resources that we need to make sure that we're waiting and listening to that person's story. So one, we can give them what they need for their individual situation and for their pets, but also to build that trust. And so what I like when first start is just saying, how are you today? Like, or what brought you in here? Or tell me how Fluffy is doing. And you can build that conversation. Once you have that conversation built, you can even then build on that and ask, if I were able to provide you resources today, would you be interested in that? And it'll become organic, and then you're starting to build that layer. It's okay if that conversation is just an intro conversation. Sometimes it takes a few times of meeting and talking for that trust to happen, and that's okay. We're just bridging and building that connection. So if we're engaging with strong emotions, so there are times where clients come to us, especially when they're dealing with a crisis, where they're going to be mad or sad or really scared or frustrated, and they may not be able to communicate the information that you need at that day. It is important to know in this situation that it is okay. Sometimes you have to just let them have space to have that emotion. And the way that you can, and if you need to get a resource done, you want to make sure that you can guide them back to what we can help them with. Sometimes when we have clients that come to us that have a variety of issues, we just need to focus on what is the one issue that is priority to them. So how can we help you today? And let's focus on that one task, and that can make it a little bit easier to manage. If people are having difficulty focusing, you can switch their attention by giving them something to hold on to, either like handing a glass of water or handing a tissue, or like even holding a paper. Just sometimes redirecting that energy into another task can help to bring individuals back down. And then sometimes you just have to listen, and either being there or giving space. Some people do better knowing that there's just someone there to listen to. Some others might ask for space, but then you can say, okay, I'll let you have this space. Just know that I'm right over here when you need me again, to give them a chance to be able to navigate those emotions. And it's important to know, and I'm going to reiterate this again, that even when clients do come to us who are angry or upset or hurt, that should not change the way that we provide resources to them. It's like sometimes people just have bad days. Sometimes when we're navigating crises, we are over threshold, and it's difficult for us to be able to bring those emotions back down. But it is our responsibility as providing equitable care to still make sure we provide that same level of care and resources to anyone that comes to our doors. So you can't do this work alone. We are in animal welfare. We are experts at our field and what we can do. But that's why it's important to build those bridges. You want to start to make partnerships with other human-based organizations throughout your community, so that way you can connect people to those sources that they need. That could be something, we can be food banks, human food banks. That can be pro bono housing lawyers, or organizations that help with housing for homeless services. That could be like lawyers, community leaders, even faith-based community leaders. You want to make sure that you really do a community assessment and see how many resources you can connect people to. It's important when doing those referrals, though, you want to actually reach out to them, especially the ones that you know you're going to use most in your community. It is ideal if you can even start like a formalized like referral agreement, so that way you know exactly what requirements that person needs. So we are making sure that person doesn't feel defeated if by going through a list of referrals that are leading nowhere, and also those organizations feel that they are actually having clients refer to them that they're able to assist, and that helps everyone succeed faster. Communication in any of these processes are key. That's both for our clients and our partners and everyone involved. So with our client, we want to make sure that when we are providing communication, that we are flexible. People who are experiencing a crisis cannot always have a come in or speak at this time and at this date. We need to make sure that any program that you build has that flexibility in mind. So how can you contact them if they are unable to access the phone? Is there email? Is there a place that you can meet them every ever so often? And if they're not, that's okay. There needs to be like a built-in backup plan for that person, and that's going to be unique to their individual situation. It's also important too that we make sure we're connecting who is communicating. For example, if we're using programs that involve other entities such as fosters, we want to make sure that we limit that communication between the person and the organization, just to make sure that that you're able to have all the information that you need to make sure that you can assess where your case is going, and that you can provide that the necessary intervention if needed. You want to make sure too that when you're doing this communication, that it's not just between the person and the one department working with them, but it's with your entire organization as well. How does your medical team play into helping this pet and person succeed? How does your behavior team, if you have one? If you, how do other coworkers and other case managers? It's just important to make sure everyone is on board. So whenever a client comes to us, they have the same seamless communication and experience. And very important with this work is boundaries. We have so much love for the animals and the people that we work with. Sometimes we want to be able to do more, but we have to remember that when we are interacting and doing things that are outside of our wheelhouse and our control, that can lead to problematic issues between both for the client and for us. So for example, we wouldn't want to make sure that we are spending our own money and our own funds. We want to make sure that we are not giving personal information and communicating off of work hours. It's really important to focus on what you can do, which is providing empathetic service, connecting them to resources that you've already collected and allocated, and being there to support that pet and providing those resources as needed. And it's also important with doing this work that we recognize compassion fatigue and resilience in our staff and ourselves. So compassion fatigue, for those who don't know, is when you're doing work in a care center. It's burnout plus that compassion fatigue care. So it's really making sure that you are able to. You want to make sure you're not running out of reserves for that, for being able to do the work that you need. Examples that you can see in staff that have compassion fatigue is usually they're kind of disengaged. They might start to have like physical ailments such as stomach illnesses. They start to feel a little bit more hopeless with their work. And the best way to combat that is through building that compassion resilience. And you do that by honestly doing all the work that we discussed here, really connecting with those clients and knowing the work that you can do in your wheelhouse, and then connecting that way. It's important that all staff who do this work understand that compassion fatigue is a matter of when, not if, and you have tools necessary to help your team navigate that. So thank you so much for taking this time, and I really do think that we are in this unique opportunity where we can help keep people and pets together. And really by opening the resources for all people and all pets, we can make a more equitable future in animal welfare. So thank you so much for having us.
Awesome. Thank you, Aleah. Great. Well, that was just incredible. Thanks so much for that fantastic presentation. My name is Philip Tedeschi. I'm a professor at the Graduate School of Social Work at the University of Denver, and I work with the Institute for Human Animal Connection there. And we hope that you'll get to know some of our work. One of the things that has happened in our work there is we've gotten to know Amanda and the Pets for Life program. And it's been a wonderful collegial and friendship that has emerged. And really, to give some perspective, it was wonderful to get to know this particular program and team, in part because as a social worker and in the process of running the program we do there, we were one of the very first human animal bond academic centers that came at this question of the connection between people and animals through the lens of the social sciences, not through the lens of veterinary medicine. And most of the human animal bond academic centers in the United States emanated out of veterinary programs. And so when we met Amanda and the program at HSUS, we found it familiar to us in many different ways. And probably one of the most important dimensions is what we refer to in our kind of broader portfolio of programs of humane communities, and really looking at the social science informed dimensions of animal welfare. So I want to give a shout out to my team at the University of Denver and the great researchers we have there, and the students. I know we have some of the students on at the conference here today, and thank you for the scholarships that were available to them to attend the conference. It's just been fantastic. So what I'd like to do with the kind of remaining time is get us started, and we're going to kind of use this time as a conversation, a broad discussion that will allow us to begin to unpackage all of the information that we just heard. And so I might get us started by talking a bit about one of the, I think, most important dimensions of this issue. And that really has to do with this question that Amanda, you brought up, and I wanted to see if we could maybe start there. But ironically, as it turns out, it appears that one of the most important dimensions of animal protection work may ultimately boil down to this very question that Aleah was referencing, this concept of empathy. Or maybe looking at it through the other end of the telescope would be the loss of trust that has occurred with communities as a feature of this constant form of subordination, domination, and diminishment of communities, often through various forms of systemic racism and oppressive action, including many of the things that Amanda talked about. Now, Breeze Harper, who many of you probably know and have read at least, references the idea that one of the critical elements currently is for privileged society and privileged communities to step aside in order to allow innovation to occur. And she's a critical race theorist who has begun to work on these questions of how we might go about changing various kinds of systemic racism that exists in our society. And ironically, and I think for many people, they maybe don't spend much time thinking about how this shows up in the animal protection movement. But one of the things that we've really started to grapple with is how to talk about these issues together. How do we talk about animal protection and the issues of social and racial justice, and look at and really begin to identify how they influence one another. And my colleague at the University of Denver, Justin Marceau, who's a lawyer, has recently published a book where he has a chapter entitled Animal Protection and Empathy, where he looks at many of the hypocrisies embedded in the animal protection movement. So I wanted to bring this back, Amanda, if it's okay, and I'm going to and certainly invite Aleah to join us in this conversation. And then I'm going to ask everybody, if you would like to ask questions, please put them right in the chat, and I will try to kind of queue them up, and we'll make this a conversation the best we can under the circumstances. So I'd really like to bring this back to this question, Amanda, that you talked quite directly about, but I think in many cases we might not fully appreciate what are the actual drivers that seem to have impacted our capacity for trusting relationships with the communities that you work with. And how do we manage that? How do we talk about these issues? What are the critical dimensions of this? Are we talking about, for example, needing to kind of employ a trauma-informed lens in order to do good animal protection work these days? Are there other strategies that you feel like need to really kind of have a finer point on them? And I'm really pointing this to some degree kind of at the mainstream animal protection movement, this question. So I'm going to open it up with that, and we'll just go from there.
It's a great question, and thank you for all of that thinking and information, Phil. I kind of don't know where to start because there's a lot to dig into with that, and I sort of hate that we're in Zoom and not in a room where we can have more of a dialogue and a conversation. But I think what you mentioned is one component is having sort of a trauma-informed approach to animal welfare, especially when we're talking about support services and understanding the position that people are in when either reaching out for services, or even more so, the way that we are implementing Pets for Life work is really proactive outreach. And so we're trying to engage with people in communities, consistently building a presence in communities that traditionally have not had access to pet resources, and doing that before someone is at a moment of crisis. And I think that there will always be a need for animal welfare, for shelters to be available to people in moments of crisis. But the more we can sort of get out ahead of that, I think the better, to where people again, just have access that helps to avoid as much as possible those moments of trauma and crisis. Of course, those can't be avoided completely, but I think that we have a lot of room to grow in animal welfare where we can start to minimize those situations. And so that's one component of it, I think, too, is really being proactive in community engagement, not waiting for people to reach out or to be in a situation where support is needed, but just building relationships and partnerships within the community, that we are here at any time for people and their pets, and to start to have a lot more consistency in pet resources. So I think that's important. But then I will say too, I don't know kind of how this audience feels about it, so it'll be interesting. Please share comments if you can, but I think we have some hypocrisy within animal welfare, and I can speak to it even from within my own organization at HSUS, that we can operate a program like Pets for Life and still judgment and discrimination can show up in policy making. It can show up in messaging, in the way that we fundraise. And so I think holding ourselves accountable and each other accountable in that as well, that we have to make sweeping changes in our movement. So not just in what programs we're operating and what services we are providing, but to make sure that we are not contributing to those systems of oppression at the same time that we say we're addressing them. And that's really complicated, and it's not easy to do. I think it takes us all kind of looking in the mirror and asking some pretty tough questions of ourselves, of how we view our role in animal welfare. If we sort of need to feel that hero moment, which I think is really common, not just in animal welfare, but I think in our field it is. And then how, again, we sort of have that power dynamic and position ourselves So that was a lot too, and that probably wasn't even the clearest of answers, but there were so many things that I was like, I don't want to say these different parts of it. I don't know, Aleah, if you have anything to add to that.
Yes, sorry, but I'm just trying to fix that. Yeah, no, I think that is key. Just I think in animal welfare, we really need to just recognize that we have a long way to go, and we need to just start working on ways to build that, to find more equitable ways of fundraising. I've seen it in my organizations I've been into as well, where it's that balance and difficulty of trying to move forward, but also sometimes we're used to certain navigating in certain ways. But like I said, it'll take a larger conversation and more courage for us to try to move forward and think of different ways and approaches.
Yeah, and then I'll say maybe one of the final things to consider that I brought up briefly is around animal policing and around the way in which we enforce animal welfare laws, statutes, ordinances, how we advocate for those laws. I think there's a lot that was intended that had good intentions, that we were thinking about potential unintended consequences from laws that protect animals and that are harmful to people, and that really in the long run, that's not better for animals. What's good for people is good for animals. So I think that's been another area of animal welfare that has become part of the identity, that we are protectors of animals, and that can oftentimes limit the way in which we engage with people and create a lot of that distrust. When you think about the over-policing of communities of color, again, we're not exempt from that in animal welfare. And so how do you begin to recognize the way that communities view us in animal welfare? Even if you don't have enforcement under your purview, that doesn't mean that the community understands that. And so if someone has gotten a citation before for not having their rabies vaccination up to date, or maybe someone had their animal taken because it didn't have proper shelter, during inclement weather, like those are things that have existed for a long time. And the way that we have interacted with and engaged with communities that we not only have to look at moving forward, but we really have to have some reconciliation of how it's been carried out in the past.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I realize these are big questions and require a lot of detail to really understand them completely. I sometimes joke about that I can blame animals for ending up working with people. And I think there are other folks who might be going, the other way around, right? And realizing that in order to understand communities and people, we also need to understand the fact that these relationships are unique and very important, often some of the most reliable and consistent relationships that people have, no matter which community they come from, that we share that unique and very special connection. And as social workers, we use this term, the ecological theory, or sometimes we refer to it as person and environment. And I wanted to just go a little deeper into this question. And there is one of the questions here is, where do we see the intersection of animal welfare and human service coming together? Amanda, are you really kind of getting at this idea that because our racially tainted criminal justice system continues to kind of utilize its strategies in ways that feel unfair? I think you used the term uneven in your presentation, and that animal protection organizations still will reference concepts like abuse an animal, go to jail, or something like that, right? Taglines that suggest in many ways that we want to use the criminal justice system's ability to punish as a response. Is that one of the reasons why persons potentially in the communities that Pets for Life works in, would they view the system potentially caring about animals more than people, or view this through this lens of the criminal justice system as being a tool being used against them, and animal cruelty is just one dimension of that?
I do, and I don't think it's just in the communities that PFL serves, but it very much is a frequent comment that we've heard, especially in getting into other movements around social change and social justice, and having conversations with people who are working on access and equity issues. When we join or participate as animal welfare, that can often be the first sort of response that we get, is that animal welfare does value and care about animals more than people. And I think that's a fair response, but that's something that we're hoping will begin to change, and that we see has already started to change. I think that animal welfare has had a sort of an awakening around that we cannot separate the two, that we have to bring people back into the equation, especially for companion animals. They are companions to people. And when we have that separation, we give up the opportunity for long-term solutions and really for looking at what's best. So yes, I think there is a ton of distrust because of the systems at large that's not specific to animal welfare, because of all the things that I shared. Those are experiences for people. That's a history that is real, and it's a present experience that people have. So that's why we need to, in animal welfare, be better informed and to have that really influence and impact our work. But then I think we really have to acknowledge that has been a pervasive way of thinking within animal welfare. I don't know about all of you, and I can't see people's faces, but I will tell you that one of the regular sentiments that I hear expressed in animal welfare, I think it's happening less and less, but people say, I got into animal welfare because I don't like people. And it for a long time, it's sort of, that's been worn as like a badge of honor, is like, yeah, people, I can take them or leave them, but animals, I really love them. And I get that. I understand where people are coming from when they say that, but that has really created these silos. And I think it's put animal welfare in a position to just not be equitable. And really to just not be effective at the end of the day in what we want for the animals as well. So again, I think that those are just tough but important questions for us to ask ourselves, for us to really start to through and have a dialogue around within animal welfare. And part of that is listening to the perspectives that maybe haven't always been valued and included in animal welfare.
Great. I'm going to just mention a couple of things that are in the chat that I think are worth kind of touching on. Megan from Denver, one of our colleagues at the Denver Animal Protection program that's our city program. She was identifying the fact that she has been offered trauma-informed training as part of their routine training as animal protection specialists. I think that's fantastic. And it sounds like there are others who are kind of reiterating that there are these specialized dimensions to their own training, or maybe collaborations or partnerships with other universities or other settings that are helping equip people to understand some of these dimensions and gain some of these resources in their work in animal protection. So I think these are good examples of some of these integrations that we're really talking about. I also want to just call out the Co-Sheltering Collaborative brings together both of these systems. That's literally the very framework of this conference. So I'm going to offer a couple more questions. I think we have time for a couple more. So this is from Katie. How do we align the needs of the community with our work in animal welfare, especially when they're contradictory? For example, medical care for backyard breeders who can't afford it. We see this often in Detroit, folks trying to get ahead with a litter. It's not animal abuse. So how do we find equitable, empathic line around these types of animal ownership circumstances? That is a challenging question. Maybe I'll send this to you, Aleah, and then we'll go to Amanda. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. So when discussing about backyard breeders and talking about like and looking at this, I think part of that empathy is let's go back and circle back as to why does that make us uncomfortable. Sometimes I would like to tell people is when you have that initial reaction of, ooh, I don't want to help, like this makes me feel really weird, kind of sit with that feeling and let's think about and dissect that and say why. So the issue that we have here is that we want to make sure that the animals that are the animals that are there are being safe and bred appropriately. And so when you have this person, we have an opportunity to reach out and discuss like, well, if we help them find a way to do this that is that follows within like ethical standards, such as providing veterinary care for those puppies, and then making sure that they are doing what's behaviorally appropriate for those puppies so that they can develop into behaviorally appropriate dogs, then we can start to build that connection with that person and then talk to and find out more about why they want to breed. I think sometimes our assumptions is that we put assumptions on people as to why they want to breed their dogs, may not necessarily be the case. And my time of working in different areas, I worked in Atlanta and New York, and I've heard a wide variety of different reasons of why people breed their dogs. Some of it is to make money off of litters, but some of it is because they love their dogs and they want their personality to spread. Some of it is that they want to bring animals to the community or provide puppies to the community in a place that we have to remember we have historically not allowed to adopt. So it's really hard to push for that if we have historically asked these people not to adopt our animals. So I think it's part of that building that bridge is first, let's work on providing resources. So if this person is breeding a dog, how can we make sure that these puppies are going to have the best possible chance? So access to care, talking about how to, making sure that they're vaccinated against parvo and other diseases. And then as we build that relationship, maybe we can talk about our perspective of why we feel that breeding is not the best route to go. But people will be more willing to listen to that perspective if they feel that it's coming from a place of understanding and trust and care for their dog, and not that just they're like a statistic or that you just care about the perception of that they don't deserve to breed dogs.
Yeah.
I've been a longtime fan of my dog is my home as an organization for those very reasons. And so, Amanda, is this an example of then that empathy leading us into the ability to identify structural issues or structural questions facing communities as compared to, let's say, other dimensions?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Ask that again, and in part maybe because I was thinking about something Aleah said and wanting to add to it. So I'll add to it, but ask that again.
Well, I was wondering whether the empathy that Aleah is referencing, really giving a lot, allowing space for perspective, right, and getting to know that individual and keeping, the ability to, truly gather information without judgment. Does that allow you then the opportunity to then identify structural questions in those communities differently than we would, if we were approaching it through a lens of, some form of kind of predetermined view of culture or identity?
Yes. Yeah, I think you've hit on something there, specifically around this breeding question. And just even the way that the language that is used and the sort of words that we use, that if it's someone who is in an underserved community or maybe a person of color that is breeding dogs, then we have a very different label than someone who is maybe middle to upper class and has a certain kind of dog that they are breeding. The majority of people still get their animals by purchasing them. We have made some inroads, of course, increasing adoptions, but there are a lot of people who breed dogs, and it just when you're someone who lives in a certain community, or you maybe look in a way that there's a presumed sort of danger and guilt, then the way that we place judgment really does vary. And so I think that's one of those important questions to ask, is not only all the things that Aleah said, but also just having that conversation that we're having only around certain demographics of people who are breeding their dogs and not all people who are breeding dogs. And I think that that's, again, one of those things for us to take a step back and to really contemplate. And it might just be in part because we are only aware maybe of people who breed their dogs in a certain neighborhood because those are the neighborhoods where animal control is getting the most complaints, or those are the neighborhoods where you have a larger presence of enforcement. And so you're aware of that situation where you might not be aware of it happening in another neighborhood or another community. So I think those are all the considerations for us to really sort of bring into the dialogue. And again, like, how are we approaching our communities, and are we doing it in an equitable way? And that gets sort of to those larger structures.
I'm the party pooper. I'm so sorry. This has been an amazing conversation, and I am so grateful to the three of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to get this conversation going. As you can see in the chat box, you really sparked something, and I hope we can take this into our breakout rooms, which is up next. And if you all quickly want to put in your contact information in the chat so people can, chime in with you later after the conference, any websites, social media, we appreciate that. Was that okay? Do you have any parting words before I take over? Philip, you're on mute.
The only thing I would like to just say is to the organizers of the conference, this conference is so important and so in some ways so overdue. And I hope that'll continue. Potentially this could be a conference that could really build off of this fantastic event and do it in an ongoing fashion. It's just a critical content area. And much of the work that Pets for Life has been doing dovetails directly with so many of the dimensions facing persons experiencing homelessness. And we know there's a high prevalence of animals, in the lives of those individuals. So thank you so much for inviting us to join you this morning. And I hope we'll continue to be able to see this topic represented at this level.
Thank you. And thank you for the free promotion. Love it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, and thank you to everybody for your interest in these topics and for being here with us today. We appreciate it.
Same. Thank you so much for having us. And again, these are great conversations that I'm so glad that we're moving forward in animal welfare, and it'll only help us to continue to grow as a profession. So thank you.